So before we actually make any toast, we have to properly understand, like what exactly is toast? Well, we can define toast as toast is just bread that is toasted. And, if you take a look at the statement here, the name of toast seems pretty intuitive, toasted, toast. But the most important aspect of this statement here is the proclamation that toast is just bread, but it's bread under some kind of status effect, that being toasted. That means that toast is just bread, but when it is toasted. So therefore, to understand what toast really is, we need to understand what bread is. So what is bread? Well, bread is a staple food, as in rice, pasta, but the math for those things are way more complicated, and we won't be covering that in today's video. But bread is a staple food made of flour and water. This forms a dough that is baked. So now that we know what bread is, we need to take a look at the parts of bread. So using this orange color here, I'm tracing out the outside of bread, of my picture of bread here. And what you'll see is there is a certain section of the bread that is a little different from the rest of it. And you can also see it in the toast picture here. But never mind that for now. So what is this orange part? Well, this orange part is known as the crust of the bread. So contrary to popular misconception, the crust is actually completely safe to eat. A lot of people seem to think it's poisonous because they keep on cutting it off when they're making bread and making toast, but it's not. It's completely safe to eat. So whenever you're doing that, you're just wasting food. So I've been getting a lot of comments about that, so hopefully that clears that up. Moving on to the other part of the bread, this part that I'm shading in this red color, that is usually colloquially known as the soft part of the bread, but in baker circles, it's actually known as the crumb of the bread, the crumb of the bread. So now that we know what bread is and the parts of bread, we need to take a little look back into history and understand where bread comes from. So evidence suggests, hang on, let me change my color. Let's do this light green color. So evidence suggests that all the way back 30,000 years ago, people were already starting to eat primitive forms of bread, and that evidence comes in the form of starch residue on flat rocks, which have been postulated by scientists to be the residue of starch extract from reeds and other plants that was spread on flat rocks and cooked to form a primitive type of flatbread. So if we fast forward all the way to only 10,000 years ago, that's when we start to see the first accounts of modern bread. Modern bread. And this happened right around the break of the Neolithic Age. So fast forward all the way to 1893. 1893. Something really big in the history of bread, and in the history of toast, for that matter, happens. The first toaster is invented. So I know what you're probably thinking. Well, we've evolved from primitive bread to modern bread, and now we have the toaster. That means that we must have toast, right? But that's where you'd be wrong, because in fact, in 1912, the first attempt at making sliced bread is undertaken, which is to say, it is a failed attempt to make sliced bread. Which means sliced bread is actually younger than the toaster. It isn't until 1928 that the first successful sliced bread is produced and manufactured and sent into the market. So now the stage is set. We have sliced bread and we have a toaster. What is going to happen next? Well, I'm sure as you've guessed it, it leads to the creation of toast. So toast is actually a pretty hard thing to talk about because of just how conceptually abstract it is. And scientists and mathematicians struggled for years after the invention of sliced bread and the toaster to properly model toast. And that is what I'm going to show you how to do today. So what scientists did was they looked back upon the definition of toast. Previously, we defined toast as bread that is toasted, and I have simplified that here as toast is equal to toasted bread. And what's important about this statement here is that it's just a declaration that toast is just bread under some kind of status, which is to say that toast is a derivative of bread. And scientists saw this and they went, oh, of course. So to find the function of toast, all we need to do is differentiate the function of bread. So today I'm only going to be talking about the natural bread function. The natural bread function only works for whole wheat bread because whole wheat bread is the most natural type of bread. If you were to do the math for, say, white bread or potato bread, the math would be much more complicated. But since whole wheat bread was the most primitive form of bread to get a function, people look towards that first. So the natural bread function can be modeled as such. Bread in terms of heat is equal to E, which is Euler's number, to the H. So scientists saw that and went, oh, okay, easy. So to find the function of T being toast, all they needed to do was differentiate in terms of H, B, which just happens to also be E to the H. So this revelation is kind of interesting because what it is saying is that toast is just bread. And that's very interesting. And this conclusion makes sense because if we graph it out, let me change this color to this pink color. If we graph this out, it actually makes sense because if you take a look at it, if on the x-axis we put heat and on the y-axis we put toastiness, if you were to graph it out, your graph would look something like this. And this makes sense conceptually because what would happen to your toast as you added more heat to it? It would simply get toastier. So finally, scientists had found a function to model toast. And immediately this was set to use because going back to the natural bread function, let me change to this green color here. The natural bread function is not only utilized to derive the function of toast. In fact, the natural bread function is related to something known as the organic sandwich function, which is to say if you integrate from negative slice to positive slice of the natural bread function, here written as e to the h, but you can think of it as b of h. If you integrate that in terms of calories, what you get is the organic sandwich function. Now, people having derived the function of toast, they knew about this organic sandwich function. And eventually, mathematicians and scientists put two and two together and they realized, hey, if we substituted bread with toast in deriving the organic sandwich function, the math should still work out. So what people did eventually is they tested that. And what ended up happening is they integrated T of H from negative slice to positive slice in terms of calories, and what they ended up finding was the function P. So what is P, you ask? Well, P was coined the organic panini function. And that was the invention of the first panini. Eventually, scientists and mathematicians, they branched out to the other forms of bread, which we won't talk about today. But eventually, paninis took off, and based off of this derivation of toast and its substitution in the organic sandwich function, we got the organic panini function. So next time you eat a panini, this is how it was created. Well, having said all that, it still begs the question of how. How do I actually make toast? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. Like we said, the main components of making toast is bread, which will become toast after being toasted, because toast is bread only after being toasted, which we have proven mathematically, and the toaster, which does the toasting, which applies the heat to the bread. So what exactly do you do? Well, I've got my bread here. And what you do is you just kind of put the bread in the toaster, and you see this button with my cursor. So what you do is you press the button down, and when you press the button down, your bread should go down with it. And after some time, the button will pop right back up, and instead of bread coming out, what you'll get is a brand new piece of toast.